Amazing. And tonight we have with us two of the Freedom Riders that took the Albany Freedom Ride from Atlanta to Albany and were arrested in December 1961 when they arrived here in Albany at the Union Station. And that's why we're here tonight, because this is the scene of the crime. This was the site of the arrest. And it's important for us to honor that. This is in a sense kind of like Old Mount Zion Church, sacred space because of what happened here in the Civil Rights Movement. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this little tour afterwards. We want to show you the terminal and point out the architecture of segregation so you understand what Jim Crow is all about in terms of the physical landscape and so on.
And thank you all for inviting us back to Albany. I appreciate all the sponsors who helped make this possible. And the Albany Civil Rights Institute, which first brought us back here into this room in 1998. And gave us the Cathedral Albany, which we really didn't know what to do with. And I still don't know quite what to do with it, but it's a treasure, and I keep it forever. I want to last night you had one of the most modern visual mediums. I'd like to go back to one of the most primitive. They did find this machine over at Albany State, somewhere in the storeroom, because I find it most effective to show you things that came from December 1961, rather than I interpret them at this late date. Let me show you what we said then, what we did then. And following up on what Dr. Formwalt said, to sort of put things into a context, we were not the first Freedom Riders in Albany. We were the sixth group of Freedom Riders to come to Albany. And so my friend Schward here and Sally Ann McCollum and several others have been here on November the 2nd, I think it was, as soon as the ICC ruling went into effect. Ms. Bertha Gober and Blanton Hall had been arrested and spent Thanksgiving in jail here. So we were the sixth group of people called Freedom Riders here trying to get the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission ruling enforced in Albany. So while being a Freedom Rider in Albany has always been very special to me, I have since that I'm a part of a long continuum of protest in the South and in Albany instead of one of the leaders of one of the beginnings. Well, just quickly, because I'm white, give you a little sense of who I am and do that visually as fast as I can. This is Shiloh Methodist Church, and it's just like all the little white churches you see out in the country. Shiloh had 4 houses, one of which served as a post office and a service station and a church. So that was the whole kit and caboodle. I'd like to also briefly touch on class. We think that poor white people were all racist. Well, we were fairly poor. This is the house I was born in. I was born in the room up there, and that's my little brother. So you can see we were not in any of these going with the wind mansions on the hill. I also resented, as I said last night, that we were called outside agitators. Because when I was in jail in Albany, I had second cousins living here. They did not come down to greet me. But my mother and her family, when she was quite small, had spent 2 years over in Taitt, Georgia, and this is a picture of them over in a cotton field. They're 4 little white kids picking cotton in Taitt. So I did not feel that I was an outside agitator when I came all the way from Telfair County to Albany, Georgia. If you're young, you don't know about this, but what we did was take down these signs. The signs were all over the South. The signs that told you who could use a facility, who could be where at any given time. And you know, of course, if there were 2 facilities, which one was fit to use and which one was an insult to human dignity. And these signs were everywhere. But what happens when you start putting signs like that up? Is sooner or later, you come down to a sign like this. sign on the Wesley Chapel AME Church in Milledgeville, Georgia, and so I didn't know I wasn't allowed, and the minister welcomed me, and the congregation welcomed me, and so it came as quite a shock that we could be kicked out of school for going to church. Well, I'm all sophisticated now, but let me show you. When I expelled from Georgia State College for Women, I went to Atlanta, and I was going to apply for a transfer to Georgia State College, but they had decided then that you were transferring, you might be the wrong color to go to a school, so you now have to have a photograph of yourself to attach to your application. And that's the only reason I know what I look like when I went on the Freedom Ride. Not very radical. Some of the influences in the movement, though, were very, very profound. Before I went on the Freedom Ride, I had attended a lecture at Albany University by a man who was introduced as a prophet. And I wasn't, I didn't know what a prophet looked like, but if he was a prophet, I wanted his autograph. And so I heard Dr. King give us a chapter and verse about why it's Christian to resist evil in the form of racial segregation. The Albany movement was well underway. My friend Gerard had been here, Mr. Harris was with him. You were riding those segregated trains back and forth from Jacksonville, was it? Or where in Florida were you in school? Ruth?
Oh, I was at Florida A&M, but I didn't have to ride the train.
Okay. The Albany movement was already underway, and these are some things I picked up while I was here, but here's a list of the demands that they were making. Where do we go from here? Trailways, train station, airport, libraries. What do we need? Carpools, clubs. Young people say, how do you organize? What do you do? This is the kind of thing you do. You figure out what you're going to do and what you need to do. And this was dated before we got here. This is November 15, 1961. So that was, the Albany movement was well underway before we got here. And I have a few copies of the Student Voice that talks about, again, this is November 25th before we got here, and it talks about students at Albany State College being expelled for being involved in the movement. So when we got here, we were really stepping into a long line of history and activism. I wanted, we sort of divided up the work here tonight. I wanted to read the fact sheet about the Freedom Ride that was released the day after we were incarcerated. It says on Sunday, December 10th at 10 a.m., 8 people boarded the Georgia Central Railroad train with tickets for Albany, Georgia. The ride had been planned by Bernard Lee of Southern Christian Leadership Conference in cooperation with members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The group intended to test the alleged segregated practice of the Georgia Central Railroad, and then it names those boarding the train. The group entered a railroad coach occupied by Negroes and passed to a coach occupied by whites. The train departed 15 minutes late. The conductor, when taking tickets, asked each Negro in the group to move to the front car. When they did not answer, he said loudly each time that they must be deaf and dumb. He took the number of the ticket of each member of the group. However, there was no other harassment from the conductor. Excuse me. When the group arrived in Albany at 3:50 p.m., they were met by between 300 and 400 Negro citizens who had come out to welcome them. The arrival of the group had been announced to the local press the day before. They went to the terminal building while 4 policemen stood by. In the terminal, the group went to the seats on the side usually reserved for whites, and several of them sat down. I did not. I didn't think we were going to be there long enough to take a seat. The police told Charles Jones, SNCC voter registration director, who had met the group along with several other members of the Albany movement, that if they were not going to buy tickets, they would have to leave. There were about 5 white spectators in the room at the time who rose but did not come to the group. The group left the waiting room and went out into the street, which was filled with scattered groups of Negroes and whites. There were between 50 and 75 whites in the streets, many of whom had cameras. The street in front of the station has 2 lanes of traffic and parking spaces along both sides of the street and down the middle of the street. Cars were parked in the spaces down the middle of the street, some of them waiting for the riders. The riders walked down the right side of the street toward the cars. There were numerous police around who told them and members of the Albany movement to wait on the sidewalk, to walk on the sidewalk, excuse me. As there was no sidewalk on the right-hand side, they walked directly to the waiting cars. 2 of them entered one car. A policeman yelled, "Call the paddy wagon." It appeared almost instantly. The police pulled the members of the group who had entered the car out of it and lined them up with the rest of the group. Charles Jones then joined the group. Bertha Gover, a student expelled from Albany State College for participating in a sit-in at the Trailways bus terminal on November 22nd, was standing behind a car and was told to join the group of arrested people. Willa Mae Henderson was sitting in a cab in the vicinity as it was taken from it to be arrested. 2 other members of the group were entering the waiting car when they were stopped and lined up with the rest. At the time of the arrest, there were no cars in the street and police were directing traffic. At the door of the paddy wagon opened, the group began singing "We Shall Overcome." They were booked with disorderly conduct, obstructing traffic, and failure to obey an officer. Bond was set at $200 each and trial was set for 1 o'clock on Monday. So that's what we said the day after the Freedom Ride about the details of it. Now, when I wanted to write about myself, I wanted to be sure I was accurate, because I knew that there were folks who knew more than I did. And I wanted to be sure I measured up. So many years ago, I came to Albany and looked up the actual indictment. And you don't bother trying to read it, but this is the bill of sale, and they say we were arrested for unlawful assembly, and this is a true bill brought by Larry Pritchett. And their names here, the people who were on that grand jury. Well, if I had nothing else to do, I might come and see if any of them are still around and say, "What were you thinking?" Down here, they describe our offense as assembling in Roosevelt Avenue and a public street, avenue and thoroughfare in Albany for the purpose of disturbing the public peace, and did refuse to dispense on being commanded to do so by Laurie Pritchett, Chief of Police of the City of Albany, a peace officer. At the time, this was rendered some months later, there was some confusion in our minds about what we were being charged with. And one of our attorneys said that among the charges that they were considering was that we were conspiring to overthrow the government of the state of Georgia. Better than obstructing justice and ordering the street, for sure. We were taken to jail. I was the only white woman on the Freedom Ride, so I was essentially in solitary confinement.